9 minutes. That's how long it took to wipe an empire that had ruled for 3,000 years off the map of the galaxy. 9 minutes. And the fleet of 12,000 ships turned into dust drifting between the stars. 9 minutes. And the species that consider themselves gods of this part of the universe learned that gods also die. And it all started with one man, one prisoner, one cage, 3 by 3 meters, in the very heart of the enemy flagship. His name was David Hale. And the Kto'Rrath Empire made the most terrible mistake in its history when they decided they could simply lock him away. You're listening to this story for a reason. Somewhere deep inside, you already feel the same thing everyone felt that day when the news came from the front. Pride, horror, and a strange, almost frightening realization of what a person is capable of when they have no choice. Stay until the end, because what happened in the 9th minute changed more than just the war. It changed the way the universe looks at people forever. To understand what happened aboard the flagship Kalvor, we must go back 2 years, to where it all began not with weapons, but with silence. Earth didn't seek war. Humans, frankly, weren't prepared for possibility that somewhere out there, among the cold light of distant stars, other intelligent beings existed. First contact came not with a handshake, but with an ultimatum. The Kto'Rrath Empire was ancient. It had conquered 47 species long before humans learned to make fire by rubbing sticks together. Their technology was millennia superior to that of Earth. Their navy knew no defeat. Their law was simple: submit or perish. When their scout ship entered the solar system, they expected to see primitive creatures crawling across the third planet, creatures that would fall to their knees at the sight of their power. Instead, they were met with silence. The wary, cold silence of a species that had already survived 2 world wars, the threat of nuclear war, and known what it was like to stand on the brink of its own destruction. People didn't fall to their knees. They started preparing. The Kto'Rrath took this as an insult. 6 months later, their fleet entered the system demanding surrender. The Earth answered with a single word: no. What happened next has become the stuff of legend. Not because humans won, they didn't. At least, not right away. The first battle of Mars ended in disaster. The Earth fleet, hastily constructed from anything that could fly and shoot, lost 70% of its ships in a single day. But the survivors didn't retreat in panic. They retreated studying, memorizing every enemy tactic, every weakness, every second of hesitation in their targeting systems. Because humans are the only species in the known universe that learns faster than it dies. And among those who survived the battle for Mars was a young pilot engineer named David Hale. David was 26 years old when his fighter jet was shot down over the red sands of Mars. He ejected 3 seconds before the explosion, his escape pod tumbling through the atmosphere as the automated systems desperately fought to save his life. He survived, but something changed in him that day. He saw his comrades die. He saw the Kto'Rrath flagships methodically, without a trace of emotion, wipe entire squadrons from orbit. He saw the efficiency of their death machines, and he understood one simple thing. People didn't lose because they were weaker. They lost because they played by someone else's rules. The Kto'Rrath fought like machines, predictably, logically, following protocols honed over 3,000 years of victories. They never encountered an enemy who refused to follow logic. David began developing a theory. He called it simply the core of chaos. A combat artificial intelligence system built not on optimal solutions, but on unpredictability, on human irrationality taken to its extreme. The problem was that activating such a core required a living mind, a human brain, directly connected to the ship's combat systems. Too dangerous. Too unstable. Earth Command banned the project after the 3rd test, when one of the volunteers fell into a coma, and the ship he was connected to began firing on its own fleet. The technology was frozen. The files were classified. David was transferred to a rear base, away from the front lines, away from the temptation to finish what he had started. But war does not wait for bureaucracy. A year after the Battle of Mars, the Kto'Rrath launched their final offensive. Their fleet, now under the command of an admiral named Zarthal, a being so ancient it remembered the fall of 47 civilizations, moved toward Earth itself. David, along with the remnants of the crew of the scout cruiser Horizon, was captured during a desperate attempt to intercept the enemy flagship, before it reached Earth orbit. Their ship was torn apart in seconds. The survivors drifted in escape pods until an enemy minesweeper picked them up, not out of mercy, but because the Kto'Rrath were curious about the workings of the human mind. They wanted to understand why the species resisted so fiercely, knowing they couldn't win. David was placed in an isolation chamber aboard the flagship Kto'Rrath, the very ship that had led the invasion fleet to Earth. 3 by 3 meters. Transparent walls made of a super-strong alloy. No possibility of escape. But they made one mistake. They didn't know that David had brought with him a neural interface, a prototype of the Chaos Core, hidden in an implant under the skin of his left wrist. Technology he'd spent 2 years developing. Technology that Earth Command had banned. Forbidden core. And now, sitting in a cage in the heart of an enemy flagship flying toward his home, David Hale made a decision that would change the history of the galaxy. He spent his first hours in captivity observing. The Kto'Rrath underestimated humans in one fundamental way. They didn't understand patience. Their culture was built on immediate dominance, on displays of force. They couldn't imagine a creature that would sit silently in a cage for 2 days, studying every detail of the ship through the reflections in the metal panels, counting the steps of the guards, memorizing the schedule of changing the guard. David did just that. He watched the guard change every 6 hours. He saw that the Kto'Rrath guards, despite their terrifying appearance, 7 feet tall, chitinous armor, for limbs ending in razor-sharp claws, move according to strictly prescribed patterns. No improvisation. No human unpredictability. He saw the ship's lead engineer, a creature named Vralkos, come and check on the prisoner every day at the same time, with the same expression of cold curiosity on his alien face. "You're not afraid," the creature said on the 3rd day, looking at David through the transparent wall. Its voice, conveyed to the translator, was mechanical, devoid of emotion. "Your kind should be afraid. We've destroyed 90% of your fleet. We're approaching your home planet. In 72 hours, we'll conquer it. And you sit here, looking at me as if you're the one holding me in a cage." David was silent for a long second. Then he smiled, for the first time in 3 days. "You know what your problem is?" he said quietly. "You think fear and capitulation are the same thing. We are afraid. We are afraid every day of this war. But fear has never made us surrender. It has made us think faster." Vralkos inclined his head, a gesture that among the Kto'Rrath meant something between contempt and mild confusion. "Philosophy won't stop the fleet, man." "No," David agreed. "It won't stop." He didn't say what he was thinking at that moment, that the implant in his wrist had already begun to slowly, imperceptibly synchronize with the security system of his own cell, a system designed by Kto'Rrath engineers who had never encountered Earth-based hacking technology, built on principles completely alien to their logic. He was playing the long game, and he had less than a day left. That night, if you can call time night in the endless darkness of outer space, David activated the first phase. The implant beneath the skin of his wrist glowed with a faint blue light, invisible to Kto'Rrath's optics, which were tuned to a different spectrum. He closed his eyes and allowed the neural interface to establish a connection. The pain came instantly, sharp, tearing, as if someone were methodically driving red-hot needles into every neuron in his brain. The Chaos Core wasn't designed for comfort. It was designed for war. He saw flashes, fragments of the ship's systems, flowing through his consciousness in a stream of pure information, ventilation circuits, power circuits, communication protocols. Everything that 3 days ago had seemed an impenetrable wall of alien technology now unfolded before his mind's eye like an open book, because the Chaos Core didn't try to understand the Kto'Rrath system logically. It searched for chaos within it, microscopic inconsistencies, random fluctuations that Kto'Rrath engineers, working according to strict protocols for 3,000 years, would never have noticed. Humans, after all, grew up in a world of randomness. A world where systems break down unpredictably, where errors occur outside the rules. And it was in these inconsistencies that David found the first crack. The ship's reactor cooling system. An obsolete protocol left for emergency manual override. A protocol the Kto'Rrath engineers forgot to deactivate because their logic dictated. Why close a door no one could ever enter through? They didn't expect that anyone could think differently from them. David opened his eyes. Blood was streaming from his nose. His hands were shaking. But on the screen of his neural interface, visible only to him, a single line of code glowed. Access granted. He smiled through the pain. 9 minutes. He whispered into the darkness of the cell. I only need 9 minutes. In the morning, ship time, Vralkos came to the cell again, unaware that the man inside had spent the night hacking the nervous system of the entire flagship. Today is a great day, human, the creature said with poorly concealed triumph. In 6 hours, we will enter orbit around your planet. Admiral Kto'Rrath will personally give the order to begin the conquest. You will witness the fall of your species. David looked at him calmly. You know what's strange? He said. For 3,000 years, you've been conquering species that have never seen truly desperate humans. Species that surrendered because they understood the mathematics of force. More ships defeat fewer ships. More weapons defeat fewer weapons. That's not philosophy, man. That's a fact. That's a fact, David agreed, until someone rewrites the rules of the game. Vralkos didn't understand the meaning of these words. It turned and left, unaware that it had just had the last calm conversation of its life. David was left alone in the chamber. He closed his eyes. The clock on his internal counter showed 5 hours and 40 minutes until entering Earth orbit. It's time to finish what he started. What happened next will be studied in military academies on both sides of the conflict for decades to come. People will call it the 9-minute miracle. The Kto'Rrath, if any of them survive to talk about it, will call it the day logic died. David activated the Chaos Core at full power at 14:07 ship time. First minute. The flagship's main reactor cooling system suddenly, and without apparent cause, went into emergency mode. Kto'Rrath engineers rushed to the control panels, confused as to what was happening. Their diagnostics showed the system was fully functional. This wasn't a malfunction. It was an attack, disguised as a malfunction so skillfully that their logic protocols couldn't recognize the threat, because they were looking for a pattern and found chaos. David, sitting in his cell, felt the pain in his skull become unbearable. Blood was streaming from both his eyes, but he didn't stop. Second minute. Life support systems on the lower decks shut down simultaneously in 7 compartments. The Kto'Rrath crew, accustomed to the absolute reliability of their technology, encountered for the first time in generations a failure that couldn't be attributed to an external influence. Their protocols demanded finding the source of the attack, but the source was everywhere and nowhere at once, scattered across thousands of microscopic changes in the ship's code. Admiral Zarthal, watching from the bridge, felt something akin to confusion for the first time in his 300-year military career. Find the source, it growled through the translator. It's impossible. Our systems are impervious to external hacking. But the hack didn't come from the outside. It came from within, from a 3-by-3-meter cage where a man, his brain exploding with pain, was rewriting the very architecture of their flagship. Third minute. The doors leading to the weapons bays began opening and closing in a random, but not entirely random, pattern. The Kto'Rrath crew rushed through the corridors, trying to understand the logic of what was happening. Unaware that there was no logic, there was only human unpredictability, embodied in digital code. Vralkos, the engineer who had been interrogating the prisoner with cold curiosity for 3 days, burst into the control room with a panic in his voice that his appearance rarely showed. It's coming from the prisoner. The neural signals, they match the attack frequency. The man in cell number 7, he's attacking us from within his own mind. Kto'Rrath turned to the main screen, where David's camera was displayed. The man sat motionless, blood streaming from his nose and eyes, but his face showed not pain but determination. Kill him, the Admiral growled. Immediately. But it was too late. Fourth minute. David took complete control of the flagship's navigation systems. He didn't try to turn the ship or steer it away from Earth. That would have taken too much time, and he didn't have time. Instead, he did something no Kto'Rrath logical system could ever have predicted. He opened communication channels with the entire fleet simultaneously, all 12,000 ships arrayed for final strike on Earth, and transmitted the coordinates of their own defense systems to each other, creating the illusion that each ship in the fleet was attacking its neighbors. Chaos. Absolute, inexplicable chaos amidst a disciplined military formation that for 3,000 years had known nothing but unquestioning order. The Kto'Rrath ships began turning their weapons on each other. Not because their captains wanted them to, but because their automated defense systems, having received false threat signals, reacted exactly as they were programmed, to eliminate the threat immediately. 5th minute. The guards burst into the compartment containing David's cell, ready to tear him apart with their bare claws. But the doors that should have opened for them remained locked, because the man inside had rewritten the access protocols in the final seconds before their arrival. David felt his heart begin to fail from the neural interface overload. Every cell in his body screamed in pain. A voice in his head, quiet, insistent, told him to stop before he killed himself. He didn't stop. 6th minute. The first Kto'Rrath ship opened fire on the neighboring vessel. The explosion tore through the night sky with a blinding flash. A second followed. A third. The chaos David had sowed in the communications system spread like a virus, jumping from ship to ship through encrypted channels that Kto'Rrath had deemed impenetrable. They did not understand that impregnability is an illusion. When the enemy does not try to break the lock, but convinces the door itself that it never existed. Zarthal watched as his fleet, the invincible fleet that had conquered 47 worlds, began to tear itself apart in a chaotic, inexplicable frenzy. Disconnect the neural link. Isolate the prisoner from the ship's systems immediately. We're trying, Admiral, Vral Kosh shouted. But he's already deep within the core architecture. He's everywhere. We can't find the boundary between his signal and our own system. 7th minute. David, losing consciousness from the pain, focused the last vestiges of his will on the one target that mattered more than anything else, the flagship Kalvor's main reactor system. He didn't try to blow up the ship. That would kill the entire crew instantly. And deep in his tortured mind, amidst the pain, fear, and absolute determination, there remained a shred of humanity that refused to see the slaughter. Instead, he disabled the flagship shields. Completely. The flagship that had led the invasion of Earth was now completely defenseless. 8th minute. The Earth fleet, the same fleet that was thought to be defeated, 90% destroyed, emerged from the shadows of the lunar craters where it had been hiding for the last 3 days, awaiting the signal that David was supposed to transmit at the moment of his capture. Because the plan was never for David to escape alone. The plan was for him to become a living weapon, hidden in the heart of the enemy, waiting for the moment when the Kto'Rrath fleet would be close enough to Earth for Earth's forces to strike the decisive blow. The remnants of the Terran fleet, hidden and silent, opened fire on the Kto'Rrath flagship the very moment its shields fell. 9th minute. The flagship Kalvor exploded in a blinding flash of light visible to the naked eye from Earth orbit. Admiral Zarthal, a being who remembered the fall of 47 civilizations, perished in the flames of his own ship, never fully understanding that it wasn't a weapon that killed him, but an idea. The rest of the fleet, already torn apart by the internal chaos David had unleashed, found itself defenseless against the Earth force's counterattack. The ships, whose defense systems had been firing at each other for the past 9 minutes, were unable to coordinate a defense against the real threat. By the time the chaos subsided, 9,000 of the 12,000 ships in the invasion fleet had been destroyed or disabled. The remaining ships retreated in panic beyond the solar system. The Empire, which had ruled for 3,000 years, lost more ships in one day than in all the previous wars of its history combined. 9 minutes. That's how long it took one man to change the outcome of an unwinnable war. An Earth rescue ship found David drifting in an escape pod among the wreckage of the flagship, the only survivor aboard the ship he had destroyed from inside. He was alive. Barely. Doctors would later say that the neural interface he used should have killed him within the first 3 minutes. The fact that he lasted 9 and remained alive after that was something medical science couldn't explain. Maybe it wasn't the technology. Maybe it was because of what he was doing it for. When David opened his eyes in the hospital on Earth, after 3 weeks in a coma, the first thing he saw was the sky outside the window, the real blue sky of the home planet he had saved. The nurse on duty at his bedside burst into tears when she saw he had woken up. She said only one word to him before running for the doctors. "You gave us our home back." David didn't answer. He simply closed his eyes and allowed himself, for the first time in 2 years of war, to feel something resembling peace. The Kto'Rrath Empire never recovered from that day. The loss of their flagship fleet and Admiral Zarthal shattered the entire structure of their military hierarchy. Other conquered species, hearing that their once invincible empire had been crushed by creatures they considered primitive, began rebellions on a dozen planets. Earth, still devastated by war but now reeling, began rebuilding its fleet using technology salvaged from the wreckage of the Cold War. And humanity, having learned the story of David Hale, also learned something more about itself. They learned that humanity's greatest weapons were not ships, not guns, not armor. It's the ability to think in a way no other race in the universe can. Irrational, unpredictable, with a desperate, boundless determination that is born only when there is nothing left to lose. David Hale, years later, when asked about that day, always gave the same answer. "I was no hero," he said quietly. "I was simply a man who refused to give in, even when logic said resistance was futile. We're all like that, every one of us." And perhaps that was precisely the true truth of that war. Not the technology, not the weapons, not the 9 minutes of chaos that tore the conquering fleet apart. And the fact is that a man, driven into a corner, deprived of all hope, locked in a 3x3-meter cage in the heart of an enemy ship, will still find a way to fight. Because people never give up. Even when all they have left is 9 minutes and one last, desperate spark of hope. And sometimes it's more than enough to change the fate of an entire galaxy. Rational and unpredictable, with a desperate, boundless determination that is born only when there is nothing left to lose. David Hale, years later, when asked about that day, always gave the same answer. "I was no hero," he said quietly. "I was simply a man who refused to give in, even when logic said resistance was futile. We're all like that, every one of us." And perhaps that was precisely the true truth of that war. Not the technology, not the weapons, not the 9 minutes of chaos that tore the conquering fleet apart. And the fact is that a man, driven into a corner, deprived of all hope, locked in a 3x3-meter cage in the heart of an enemy ship, will still find a way to fight. Because people never give up. Even when all they have left is 9 minutes and one last, desperate spark of hope. And sometimes it's more than enough to change the fate of an entire galaxy. And